Thank you for joining the Technologies and Solutions for Coal Transition webinar. We hope it will provide a great opportunity for coal mine operators, national coal authorities, and other participants in the coal transition to hear from UK companies on how their experience and expertise can be applied to challenges in the region. As we recover from the coronavirus pandemic, we must work together, both to build back better our world for future generations, but also ensure we leave no one behind. A green and resilient recovery will create employment in industries of the future while addressing the urgent and linked challenges of public health, climate change, and biodiversity loss. Decisions taken now will have far-reaching consequences. We must choose to embrace innovation and technology. We all know the issue of the energy transition is not easy. However, a good place to start is through constructive dialogue to help generate solutions and by learning from each other. Today is an opportunity to do this, and in particular, understand how we can transform energy sectors and economies to achieve clean growth. As the host of the COP26 Climate Summit, the UK is putting a clean and resilient recovery at the heart of our presidency. But we recognise the challenges that energy transition presents, in particular for communities who depend on coal. We have seen and encountered these challenges in the UK. The transition away from coal should always be economically and socially inclusive, in particular offering alternative training and employment opportunities, with local communities at the heart of planning. Britain's reliance on coal for electricity has fallen from 70% in 1990 to less than 3% today. It was also the first country in the world to commit officially to phasing out its coal operations by 2024. UK companies have been at the forefront of this process, developing and deploying technologies and solutions to support coal transition, including environmental and social impact assessment, coal methane management, mine closure and mitigation, and innovative ways to repurpose mines to support the energy transition. Across the UK, innovative projects have been creating new, green jobs where once communities were reliant on coal. From repurposing old mine shafts to provide clean, affordable heating, to low-carbon hubs in the north of England. We are happy to share our experiences and mistakes across borders to support other countries and communities embarking on transition.
Hello, good morning everyone. Good morning and welcome to our webinar on Technologies and Solutions for Coal Transition. I'm Tim Buisre. I'm the Country Director for the UK's Department for International Trade. I'm based in Sofia in Bulgaria and I'll be moderating the event today. If you're not aware, the Department for International Trade is the UK government department that supports UK companies to do business overseas and also to help overseas companies to get established in the UK. And we have a team across the whole of Central and Eastern Europe, covering all countries in the region. They'd be very happy to meet you if you don't know them already, and their contact details are available on the homepage of this event website. So we're very pleased to have such a keen audience for our webinar today. Well over 100 people registered from across the region, including Poland, Hungary, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Bulgaria, Serbia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and North Macedonia. There are one or two others as well, and apologies if I haven't mentioned your country by name, but you're equally welcome today. As you will know, the topic of coal transition has been in focus like never before. Driven partly by the EU's climate change agenda and the European Green Deal and the 17 billion Just Transition Fund, which comes with that. Many countries across our region are now tackling the social, environmental and technological challenge of closing down coal-fired plants and migrating to low-carbon energy sources. Now, of course, we know that the issues around this transition are not easy, but a good way for us to start, I think, is through constructive dialogue and helping to find solutions and learning from each other. And that's really what today is about. As the host of the COP26 Climate Summit in Glasgow later this year, the UK, of course, is putting clean growth at the very heart of its agenda. We particularly recognise the challenges that this transition presents to communities which depend on coal, and we've seen those in the UK. We realise that the transition from coal always has to be economically and socially inclusive, offering alternative training and employment opportunities. The UK's reliance on coal for electricity has actually fallen from 70% in 1990 to less than 3% today. So it's a long way. A long way has come in the last 30 years or so. We're also the first country to commit officially to phasing out coal operations, which is due to happen by 2024. Now, of course, these policies are supported very much by UK companies, which have been at the forefront of this process, developing technologies and solutions to support coal transition, including environmental and social impact assessment, coal methane management, ways to close mines and mitigate the impact of mine closure, and innovative ways to repurpose mines as well to support the whole process of energy transition. We're very happy to share our experience and, of course, our mistakes to support other countries which are going through this transition process. So I hope that you find the presentations today relevant and useful. You can find the full agenda on the webinar page if you haven't done so already. And we would be very happy to try to answer your questions during the question and answer session at the end. Please type your questions in the chat window and we'll pick them up from there. So thank you for that. First of all, I'm delighted to introduce Nick Ethelston, who is the head of Commercial Report and Advisory Services at the UK's Coal Authority. The Coal Authority is the organisation which is essentially responsible for the management of the UK's coal sector. So please, Nick, take the floor. Over to you.
Morning, everybody, and thanks for that, Tim. So I'm Nick Ethelston, as and head of Commercial Reports and Advisory Services with the Coal Authority. So we work UK wide. So we're a government body who covers England, Wales, and Scotland. So everything that I sort of talk about here relates to all parts of the UK. So what I'm going to run through today is a little bit about who we are, the work that we do, and how that sort of translates into on the ground work as well. So work around public safety, coal mining subsidence, mine water treatment and tip inspection, which are some of the key areas of work that we're involved in, and then a little bit around the innovative work, the sort of turning liabilities into assets, which we're undertaking, and one of the some of the further presentations are going to sort of touch on today as well. So a little bit around our story. So. The industry was initially privatised way back in 1947, and that was all coal mining across the UK. Then became part of a national corporation. It was and this ran all the way through into the 1980s and to the 1990s, where the coal industry was at that point privatised. 1994 was when the Coal Authority was initially created as part of that legislation to license coal mining operations and manage what was seen as probably a fairly quick sort of close down of parts of the industry and transfer some of those liabilities into the private sector. I think it's fairly safe to say, with the fact that the Coal Authority are here today and working away, that idea that things would be quickly sorted out, addressed and dealt with was probably a little bit hopeful. But actually, I think it shows how a lot of the work we do is now contributing to environmental matters, and actually, as we work more and more on sort of new innovative technologies and with partners on those kinds of things, there are some real opportunities actually around coal mining legacy. So we're a non-departmental public body, so we're a government body, and we're part of the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, which some of you might know better as BEIS. We provide a mix of expert advice and creative solutions, sort of managing public safety and environmental issues, everything to do with coal mining legacy. And as I say, we also license the remaining coal mining industry as well. That's some of our work. So there's, I won't dwell on this too long, but there's various sort of statutory responsibilities and powers that set out what we do as well. So the key work is around the Coal Mining Substance Act and the Coal Industry Act, which sort of sets out what work we do, what liabilities we have as well in terms of dealing with substance matters that might take place from historical coal mining. And that all very much relates to the fact that it was a public industry for many, many years, and therefore some of those liabilities still sit with the government. And therefore, if certain types of coal mining substance take place, for instance, then the Coal Authority will come out, assess, investigate those, and if relevant, then fix them and make everything right again. And we also work with other government bodies under the Water Act, and this is I'll touch on this, but this is very much around mine water management, which is also one of the key areas of work which we undertake as well. So yeah, it's all around protecting the public and the environment in former coal mining areas and managing the legacy with what is a sort of I'd class as a very sort of mature industry, certainly in terms of on a wind down there as well. And there's lots of other work we then do around historical property and liability sites as well. Because as you can imagine, if the whole industry was at one point sat within public ownership, then there's a lot of smaller issues that constantly come up around property ownership, liabilities, and things like that, which need to be dealt with as well. So a little bit on our work and some of the things we do. So just to give an idea of sort of scale and where we're involved and what sort of things. So 11% of the UK is occupied by the UK coalfield, and we have about 173,500 recorded mine entries. Though it's likely that there's probably 2 or 3 times that which are unknown as well. Some of the people on here today might have previously visited our offices and archives in Mansfield, and certainly if there's a visit in future, anybody's welcome to come and see our extensive archives, which hold all the historical plans and our databases as well, which have brought this very much sort of up to the present day in having as much of this information as we can held electronically as well. There's 9 million properties on the coalfield, and 130,000 of those are within 20 metres of at least one mine entry. Some of the work that I'm involved in is within the UK property industry, where if you're buying a property on the coalfield, then you need a coal mining report to tell you what sort of mining legacy there is as well. And that all links back to having a really good sort of database of coal mining information, as up to date as it can be, with as much of that information fed into it, so that we can support industries such as conveyancing, infrastructure and development. We assess and review about 825 surface hazards a year as well. We don't accept all of those, but that gives a rough estimate. It usually is somewhere between 800 and 1,000 year on year. And those numbers haven't been particularly dropping for quite a number of years as well. And then we're involved in we permit access to our property, which is underground sort of coal seams and areas of historic mining. And we're involved in the planning system. So whenever planning applications are put in on the coalfield, if it's in what we class as a high risk area, then we're consulted on those. And then the other piece of work, as I say, is we manage about 122 billion litres of water a year through our mine water treatment schemes as well. So our public safety and subsidence work is very much around keeping people safe. And if coal mining subsidence takes place, then we have a team that works all around the country. We have regional engineers that will go out and make things safe and assess the issues. But we also have a proactive function to that as well. And to give an idea of the scale of that, last year we reviewed nearly 11,000 mine entries proactively as well to assess their state And that's part of a rolling programme to consistently be reviewing our mine entries and issues that might relate to them as well. So a few pictures. I think this will all be fairly standard to a lot of you, but a couple of examples here. So this one was from 2016. The A1 is one of the key arterial routes through the UK, and this was a collapse, which initially looked like a very, as they often do, a very small sort of area of tarmac, which had collapsed in as well. And we, working with the UK Highways Agency, we went out, assessed that this was a mining legacy, a mine entry issue. And the key here was the fact of actually getting the road working again as quickly as possible. So it was very much focused on, okay, there's a mining legacy issue there. It needs to be addressed. What needs to be done? Working together to sort of quickly address that. Bring in construction partners who will do that sort of work for us, and getting the road open again, which I think was within about 24 hours that work was completed. Another example this was in Glasgow in 2017, and again presented itself just as a small area of tarmac. But the scanning, which was undertaken by one of our partners, again showed the scale of the subsidence that had actually taken place below ground as well. Again, as is always the case, this was a key arterial road into the city, so it was paramount to get it made safe, but also open again as quickly as possible. And as can be seen in a couple of pictures, there were a lot of services running over this site as well, which made it quite a challenging piece of work, but something that had to be done quite carefully so that it didn't affect a much wider area with that as well. Just a couple of miscellaneous pictures of the type of things we deal with, and some of the issues that come up as well. The picture second in the middle on the top row, and in the bottom right hand corner, that's a before and after of a subsidence event which we had. And we do always like to let everybody know that the Renault Clio that you can just see did actually survive as well, and was actually okay. A few more pictures. So this relates to subsidence events, to mine entry collapses, to fissures, and a lot of these the pictures actually you can see here. Some of those are quite recent as well. So a couple of them are in the more recent years. One was taken in late 2020 as well. So it gives an idea of the ongoing sort of subsidence and public safety work which we do. So another area, as I've mentioned, is around mine water management. And so we have a number of mine water treatment schemes, about 75 of them across the UK. And they're to manage the iron content that comes out of water, which comes out of former coal mines as well, which often presents itself as very, very orange, can have quite a heavy impact on watercourses through the visible metals and also the invisible metals as well. And there are two key types of mine water treatment scheme which we have. One is a sort of passive, where we use aeration and reed beds, as can be seen in the picture. And the other type is where we actually use chemical treatment to treat the water as well. And that very much depends on the chemical content and what needs to be achieved in a particular location. So yeah, last year 4,500 tonnes of iron solids prevented from entering watercourses. And to give an idea of the scale of work, sort of general maintenance work as well, we replaced about 27,000 square metres of reed beds as well. So there's a lot of work in terms of the mine water protection, the mine water maintenance, which goes into making that sort of a successful programme. Sorry, 82 treatment schemes in total across Britain as well. And we do some work, so working with universities, with other government bodies as well. We do some work now on other types of mine water, so not just coal mine water, but metal mine water as well, and trying to bring some of our sort of expertise and the skills and structure that we have to supporting other mining legacy issues, which you can find around the UK as well. Another area which we've undertaken for a number of years, but has certainly grown in the media and has become a more pressing issue over the last couple of years, is around tip inspection and tip management as well. So the Coal Authority own a certain number of former coal mining tips, but only a very small amount, with the large majority of them being disposed in, as I said, when the industry was privatised in 1994. A lot of those tips passed into private ownership, and in many cases have moved through multiple owners since then. So we've been doing some work with the Welsh Government, the Welsh Local Authorities, Natural Resources Wales, to develop a colliery tip assessment framework, a database of coal tips across Wales, and then a GIS system to actually allow us to categorise, map and action plan what work might be done to so this is very much around sort of keeping people safe, protecting the environment as well, and recognizing that in the same way as there's a very good database in terms of mine entry and mining legacy, that's something that also needs to take place for tips as well. So yeah, that's one of the pieces of work that certainly has grown over the last couple of years as well. In terms of just looking forward, so that's very much around some of the liabilities that we deal with, some of the issues that are ongoing for us in terms of, and that we work with across the UK. But I think where I'd like to sort of move to is, and I think very much some of the other presenters today are talking about some of the really great opportunities there are around coal mining legacy, and actually turning it from an asset, turning it from a liability into an asset. Sorry, wrong way around. Yeah, very much looking at how we can take things like byproducts, how we can take some of the things that are dealt with like water and heat, and actually use them to sort of proactively contribute to sustainable and innovative new development. So just touching on a few sort of areas around that as well. So one of the things that we have a lot of from our mine water treatment schemes is ochre. So that's a byproduct of our treatment processes, and previously that was seen of as a liability, as something that was disposed of as waste, and through the work of an internal sort of innovation team, very much looking at sort of these innovative opportunities is what we can do. It was identified that actually some of the properties around ochre and some of the other uses of it were something that we could actually turn into something which was a product which people could use, which could contribute sort of positively, and which may have a value to it as well. So very interesting. Our ochre has moved from something that, as I say, was a waste product to something that we can process and then successfully use or sell to others to use in land remediation projects. That's been sort of trialled and found to be successful. It's something that can be used in the wastewater treatment process instead of ferric sulfate. And it's also something that we've been working with the pigment industry on as well, in terms of actually something to be used for paints and colours as well. So very much a good example of how actually some of these products, some of these waste products, can be used in a very sort of different way as well, looking into the future. And So the next presentation will talk on this in more detail as well. But one of the big areas of focus for us is around heat from abandoned coal mines as well. So there are some really great opportunities here around low carbon, sustainable heat sources. The opportunities of linking into district heat networks, and very much taking and harnessing the heat, and also harnessing the water as well. So we're very much, as I touched on earlier in the presentation, we pump and treat a large amount of water, and very generally there are opportunities to look at how that water can be better used, can be better managed, and linking in with sort of catchment-wide management plans around water, thinking around matters like water scarcity, and a very much sort of UK and beyond thoughts around water management in general as well. And call out the work we do with one of our key partners at the BGS as well, where we've developed a mapping tool, and that's very much to sort of set out water temperatures as well, and again that links in then to the other information that we make available on our sort of online database as well. So this all sort of comes together into these ideas of bringing these liabilities forward into assets, and trying to put all the information out there to homeowners, to developers, to landowners, to make as much of it sort of available in a high quality as possible, so it can be used to help shape future development, help reduce risk, and identify where there are any issues as well. So if anybody sort of would be interested in links to any of our online sort of mapping systems or any of those sorts of things, then very, very sort of happy to share any of that out in terms of the sort of things that we have out there as well. So that was just a sort of little bit of a whistle-stop tour of the sort of work the Coal Authority do, very much sort of the journey we've been on. And I think one of the big learnings is it's very much an evolving journey in terms of the sort of the work that we're involved in, how mining legacy is looked at, and how we link in with partners, I think, and work more generally to try and minimise sort of risks, protect the public and the environment, but actually bring forward opportunities for sort of new, sustainable, low carbon, sort of innovative ways of working. Thank you.
Nick, thank you very much. That was an excellent overview, very interesting. And thank you also for your invitation to your Mansfield headquarters, which I think would be of great interest to many of the people on the line. And I hope that we would be able to organize something like that when travel restrictions allow. We do have a couple of minutes left, so if you don't mind, there are some questions which I might raise at this point. I'm not sure if this is best addressed to you, actually, Nick, but there is a question from Dr. Kancheva, who represents the miners' union in Bulgaria, about the social impact on local communities and how to avoid the negative outcomes of coal mine closure. Is there anything that you can say about this? Any observation that you can make? And perhaps I'll ask the other speakers to consider this too when their turn comes. Perhaps any examples that you could give from the UK's experience.
Thanks, Tim. It's quite interestingly something that, in terms of what the Coal Authority was sort of set up to do, that was outside of our remit. But I think in terms of looking sort of widely across the UK, there are some really good examples that can be picked out in terms of where sort of very specific funding has been used to regenerate former mining areas as well. And I think where you see that being successful is where there's really good holistic planning. at sort of a local, regional and national level as well, in terms of setting out a really clear sort of direction for how areas can be regenerated, and that's right the way from things like sort of skills training through to bringing new employment into an area, to regeneration of former sites as well. I think there's also some really good examples of areas where good quality regeneration, again, that's properly planned out and well thought out by the development industry, has sort of really successfully rejuvenated former mining areas as well, and that's that mix of things like sort of new housing, new jobs, a focus on sort of the social side of things as well. But I certainly think it's I suppose the comment I'd add is, from my experience sort of working in the planning system as well before this, the town and country planning system, is around the need to sort of have that really sort of holistic, thought out plan for what needs to be done and what the different levers are to try and achieve that.
Thank you, Nick. Yeah, I appreciate this is possibly not really under the remit of the Coal Authority, but it's certainly a theme which I think is of great interest, and probably one that we need to explore in more detail in our future work. There's a related question from Tony Milne about repurposing mines as tourist destinations. So, for example, theme parks or dirt bike rides. Is that something that's been successful in the UK? Do you have any examples of that?
There's the National Coal Mining Museum, which is based not far up the road from myself, a little shout out in Yorkshire. And that's been a really successful, or is a really successful venue in terms of somewhere that people can go. They can go underground. It's run by former miners who have the knowledge and the passion of the coal mining industry, and it's a really, it's been sort of very, very successful, that has as well. There's a few other locations. So there's a site in Wales, there's a site in Scotland as well. I think in terms of, sometimes, like any sort of tourist destination, it can sometimes struggle. But the National Coal Mining Museum is one that I'd call out, because they have been able to sort of harness the underground side of things as well. So you can go underground, you can see what it was like, and they do a lot of educational work with schools as well. So still keeping that idea of what the coal mining industry, in all of its sort of good and bad side of things, was actually like as well, right from when it first sort of started off. So yeah, in terms of former sites, a lot of that is sort of dependent on where they are and what they've been used for. I think there's probably quite a fine line between sort of social uses and anti-social uses, probably in some areas, for mining sites, especially if a use for them hasn't been found.
Thank you. Yeah, no, that's a good tip, the National Coal Mining Museum, and it's again, it's a theme that we could potentially develop if countries in our region are interested in developing coal as a heritage, as a tourism heritage. I think we've got time for one final question, which is actually from my colleague Mark Smith in the mining sector team of DIT. He's interested in how you're funded. So who pays for the repairs following the collapses that you've highlighted on the A1, for example?
Yes, it's a good question, actually. So we're a government funded, although we're sort of so we're part of BEIS, so we're funded through BEIS and the UK government as well. But quite a bit of the work we've done and a part of our direction has been actually as well to develop other sort of self-funding opportunities as well, and that's very much with sort of part of my role and my work as well. Is so we sell reports into the housing industry, and that's actually a commercial industry that we opened up to competitors as well in 2015. And we offer advisory services into other government bodies, into the development industry, sort of supporting anybody around mining legacy as well. So our model is very much actually government funded, but delivering our services in a way that allows us to generate and offset some of that funding as well. And that's sort of a continual piece of work. So there's very much work around actually how we can make ourselves zero cost, not just zero carbon as well, but find ways to sort of generate income sources and the like, which will actually mean that we don't have a cost, or we can address as much of our own cost ourselves as well.
Yes, thank you. So a fairly typical UK model, a government agency which is expected to generate some income towards its costs. Yeah, thank you very much. I think that's all we have time for the moment for Nick. So again, thank you very much for your presentation, and we'll move on to the next presenters, who are Alison Monaghan and Charlotte Adams. Alison from the British Geological Survey, and specifically from the UK Geoenergy Observatory in Glasgow, who is also working with Charlotte on mine energy, so the use of mine water heat and heat storage in the UK. I think, Charlotte, you're going first, aren't you? Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Tim, and good morning, everybody. It's a privilege to be here to talk to you all today. I'm one of Nick's colleagues at the Coal Authority, and my role is the commercial manager for mine energy. So one of those initiatives he was talking about, turning liabilities into assets, that's very much what my work is focused on the heat side. Could I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So Nick's already given a very extensive description of the kind of work that we undertake, and as I mentioned, this is going to focus very much on the heat side of things. Nick mentioned that we had 80 or so treatment systems across the UK, and that involves effectively water coming out of the ground either where we pump it or it comes out of the ground under gravity. And we've had a quick look at the heat potential of those discharges, and as that stands, we have around about 100 megawatts of heat collectively, which is currently going to atmosphere. So one of the first tasks for us has been to look at those sites and see whether we can use those for developing wider heat projects. So I'll give some case studies on that later on, and that's very much what this talk will focus on. And it has relevance for regions where the coal mines are abandoned or where you're still mining as well. A lot of the work we're doing is obviously post-abandonment for us, after the mines have been abandoned and flooded. And quite often when we're doing the mine energy work, we're thinking, oh, if only we'd known about this when we were abandoning, we could have put a pipe in there, or we could have done this slightly differently. So we've got lots of ideas about how things could be done. So we're very happy to collaborate and share any knowledge. If you're a region that's considering abandonment or going through abandonment and you're interested in the heat opportunities, then please come and talk to us about that. Next slide, please. So Nick's already detailed a little bit about the Coal Authority. So to focus more specifically on the resource that I'm looking at, we have around about 23,000 abandoned deep coal mines in the UK. And the thing about those is their distribution. So they underlie round about a quarter of our built environment. So we've got good correlation between areas where there's flooded abandoned mine workings and some of our towns and cities, which is not surprising because many of them were created on the back of their coal reserves. So we've got this really good correlation between where the resource is and where the demand is. And we believe that there's enough heat stored within the flooded abandoned workings to potentially heat all of the buildings above it. So it's a vast resource of heat that we can tap into. Could I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So to think a bit more about how we go about deploying the mine energy, and also just thinking more widely about the coal industry. So we had 3 centuries of deep mining for coal in the UK, and that ended in 2015 with the closure of Kellingley Colliery. And that's also aligned with us phasing coal out of our energy mix for electricity production. And so now we're looking at the opportunities within these flooded mines that because they've been abandoned, the pumps were turned off, the water levels have recovered. And that presents an opportunity for us to use that water as a source of geothermal heat. So the kind of thing that you're looking for a mine energy project is you're looking for water within a reasonable depth of the surface. And by reasonable depth, we would say 100 meters or so of surface. And that's because of the electricity used to lift the water out. So if you've got access to things like some renewables, maybe some wind power or solar photovoltaics, then you could have a deeper water level to offset that, but you've got to think about the electricity cost in lifting the water. So you need to know the depth of the water beneath the surface. And then the next thing you need to have some seams of, worked seams beneath your site. And generally you want to have a few options there. So more than one seam is good. And the way we tend to configure these systems is that we would access the water, and this is assuming we don't have a discharge that's coming out at surface that we can use. And I've got case studies of both, but in ones where you're going to drill purpose-designed boreholes, you would drill down to the deeper seam that you've got. So we're talking at maybe, on average, probably for most of our projects, we're looking at depths of no more than 500 meters maximum. Most of them are probably 200 to 300 meters for the deeper drilling. And then you take water from the deeper seam, run it through a heat exchanger where we would drop the temperature by 5 degrees. And the important thing is here that the mine water doesn't run around your heat network. It stays within this loop that we've got on the screen here. So the mine water comes up through the heat exchanger, the temperature's dropped as the heat is extracted, and then we put it back underground. And we look to re-inject it at a shallower seam. And we also check the pathways between where we're taking the water from and where we're putting it back, so that it's got the maximum amount of time to reheat. It only needs to pick up 5 degrees again to get back to your starting temperature, because you don't want to be in the situation where you're cooling down your source by over abstraction. So it needs to be carefully designed, but this is quite easily achievable if you've got access to mine plans and other operational data from the mines. And just thinking about this globally, there's around about 30 mine energy projects running globally on various different scales. So people often say, oh, how much do these things cost? And it's very difficult to generalize because of the examples we have. They're all quite different. Some of them are on heat networks, some of them are single buildings. So it makes it difficult to generalize, but it does really highlight how versatile this can be as an energy source. So there's loads of different applications for it. It's also very compatible with heat networks. So the reason it's of interest to us in the UK is because of the government's intention that more heat will be supplied through heat networks. As a country, we haven't adopted heat networks because we've had access to cheap gas. Most people have an individual heating system within their own home. So we're not used to using heat networks as other countries are, but it's been recognised as a good way to help decarbonise heat. So mine energy is really compatible with that, and particularly with the very modern heat networks where the temperature is supplied at ambient temperature and then upgraded at point of use. And that presents some really good opportunities for business. So there's lots of supply chain opportunities there, both in installing the heat networks, supplying the heat exchangers and the heat pumps that we need. And there's also expertise required on the consultancy side and drilling. So there's quite a lot of supply chain opportunities. We're getting quite a lot of interest from other energy sectors, such as oil and gas, who are interested in looking at their exploration techniques to switch over to mine energy. So we see this as a really good growth area for the UK. I noticed there was a question on social aspects before as well. So before I forget to answer, I had a little comment to make on that, is that we're talking to people in communities about this. Before I joined the Coal Authority, I was doing academic research, and we did quite a lot of work with communities and how they felt about it. And I think there was a feeling of, they've been in a region where the coal has been extracted and it's been traded and burnt and it's left their area. and then they're perceived as being, left with some of the environmental impacts of that industry. But when we talk about the potential to go back in and use those mines for heat, people we found are generally really positive about that, and they feel that they could get benefit from it. And so there's opportunities for communities to operate and manage their own heat networks, for example, and on the back of other industries, which I'll talk about in the next slide. But you could attract other industries that want to use that heat and are also attracted by access to a low carbon form of heat that would then also bring other jobs into the area as well. So there's just a real kind of potential there for some good social value out of this. I must say I'm not an expert on it. This is just from the conversations that we've had with some of the projects that we've been involved with. Next slide, please. So this is kind of how we're thinking about using mine energy and deploying it kind of in the bigger picture. One of the benefits of using the mine energy source with a heat pump, so because of the temperatures we're working with, on average, we're working within the range 10 to 20 degrees. We have some deeper mines that are higher temperatures, but generally we're working at those temperatures, so we need a heat pump to lift the temperatures to more usable ones. And because the temperature of the mine water stays constant year round, when you compare the mine water energy system to something like an air sourced or a river sourced heat pump, we see vast efficiencies there. So the what we call the coefficient of performance, the ratio of amount of electricity you put into the heat you get out, is round about 4 for a mine energy system, and that stays constant year round. But for an air sourced or water sourced, where the source temperature drops in winter when you need the heat most, that coefficient of performance drops to around about 1. So the mine energy being a constant temperature is a really, really good source. And we're looking at increasing those temperatures by storing heat from other energy sources, such as data centres and other waste heat sources. So as well as doing things like heat networks, we're looking at industries that could use the heat as well, such as horticulture. Next slide, please. So a quick whiz through a couple of the projects that we're doing. This is our Seaham Garden Village, which is to develop 1,400 homes, half of which will be affordable, using one of the mine waters that we pump continuously for environmental protection reasons. So this water's at 20 degrees, and this is a project that's been taken on by our local municipality. Durham County Council are leading this, and we are working effectively as the energy supplier on this, so working with them to provide the source of heat for this development, which will involve a heat network. So this is using an accessible mine water that's at surface already. Next slide, please. Another project we're working on at the moment, we're drilling the boreholes there, is Gateshead. So we're drilling targeted boreholes into the former mine workings down to depths of about 150 metres, to extend an existing heat network that already runs using a CHP system, so a combined heat and power running on gas. They want to effectively turn that back, so they reduce their carbon emissions and bring in a large heat pump running on mine water to add a big extension to this heat network. So that project's a really exciting one for us, as well as Seaham, and they're both currently underway. Next slide, please. So I'll now hand over to Alison. I hope I've demonstrated that there's lots of potential there. Happy to take any questions. Loads of opportunities for the supply chain and developing a new market for heat as a commodity. So I'm going to hand over to Alison, who's partnering with us in some of the research that they're doing, which is helping to promote the case for mine energy. But thank you, Alison.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. So yes, I'm just going to take you on a brief journey to Glasgow in Scotland. Glasgow is where the COP26 conference will be held later in 2021, so up here in Scotland. And in Glasgow, we've been developing what we're calling a underground observatory, a geoenergy observatory. And the underground observatory in Glasgow is looking at this area of mine water heat and heat storage. So there are a lot of science and innovation opportunities in learning how to utilise the heat that Charlotte has described within the mine system, how to do that economically and sustainably. There are lots of geological processes under the ground, hydrogeological processes. There are lots of challenges on the surface in terms of the infrastructure, as Charlotte describes, the kind of geological engineering of heat pumps and heating networks and so on. And so this observatory in Glasgow is something that the UK government has funded for the academic community and for industry to come and use to do their own research and innovation. And so some of the main areas that people might come to use the observatory for are very much to increase the evidence base on using the subsurface mines for heat, looking at the wider impacts, the environmental impacts of that, of change in the subsurface, cycling of heat and so on. And as a place where people can come and innovate technologies to reduce costs and reduce risks. And together all of that will also inform regulation and policy and raise awareness generally. So the picture on the right hand side is one of our research compounds in Glasgow. It's got 3 boreholes beneath the ground. It's very difficult to actually see them because obviously they're beneath the ground. And then this was in the stages of development. Some of the environmental monitoring equipment isn't quite in this compound yet, but it will be installed soon. And then there will also be additional infrastructure put in there in terms of heat pumps and so on. So the next slide I've got here just gives you an aerial photograph of the area in which we are developing the geological observatory, the underground observatory. So this is the east end of the city of Glasgow. The city centre is over in the west, over here. And the blobs I've got on this diagram, these are the locations of our boreholes that go down into the old mines. So in this location here, we've got the River Clyde, the major river that runs through Glasgow. And underlying this whole area are a series of shallow mine workings, and our boreholes in green target those mine workings at a depth of about 50 and about 85 metres below the ground. And then our boreholes in purple are boreholes that are looking at the environmental baseline and environmental change. So this area that you see on the photograph is typical of many UK towns and cities that are underlain by coal mines. It's an area where there's both industry and where people live, and it is an area that does suffer from fuel poverty. So as Charlotte indicated, having that coincidence of a potential heat source from areas that also suffer from fuel poverty and are in need of regeneration is highly powerful in terms of an opportunity for the future. We've done a little educational engagement in this area, thinking back to the comment on social aspects of the work. That's something we're taking forward as we develop the observatory, but very much involving the local community in what we're doing in the area and trying to explain how the underground in this case can be a useful source of heat, and the former mines can be a useful source of heat. So just to explain a little more detail what the Underground Observatory is about at Glasgow, on this slide I'm just trying to explain some of the components of an observatory. So there are boreholes that go under the ground, and then within those boreholes there is a lot of monitoring equipment. So there are cables that go down the boreholes to measure the temperature and the electrical properties and other groundwater properties. Obviously, there's a lot of work goes on in terms of sampling and monitoring of the environment under the ground and of the mines. As I just mentioned, we've been involved in quite a lot of stakeholder engagement, public engagement around this to try and raise the profile of this potential low carbon energy source. And very much we've been conducting an series of environmental surveys which record the baseline before any geothermal work takes place in the area. Because it is a post-industrial area, the environmental situation is quite complicated because lots of things have previously happened in the area. And so it's important we document the quality of the water, the chemistry of the soils, whether there are any gas emissions from mines and that sort of thing before we start doing any geothermal work on the subsurface. And very much addressing that, all the data that has been collected as part of the observatory is made openly available on the internet, so anybody can look at it. So open access to environmental data is one of the key aspects of the work that we're doing around this observatory. So just for those of you that are familiar with coal mines and the subsurface, these are two cross sections of where our boreholes go into the coal mines, just to give you an illustration of what the research infrastructure looks like. So here are our boreholes and here are our mines. So we've got an upper coal mine working, which has coal pillars remaining in it and voids. And then we have a deeper borehole at different locations that targets a mine working that's much lower down. And so by doing this, we've got variability in the depth and in space of where these boreholes are to look at the geology and the processes and the flow in the heat in the subsurface. And these boreholes have got a lot of sensors and infrastructure down them to really understand what's happening underground. So just to give two quick examples of how people might want to use the observatory, we want to know how big this mine water heat resource is that Charlotte and I have talked about. And there's a lot of science and innovation to be done in terms of understanding how big that heat resource is, and whether if we start pumping from boreholes, what will cause what we call thermal breakthrough, one borehole to see the same heat signal as another. And all that has implications for how these schemes are regulated. So if lots of people are pumping mine workings, how do they interact with each other? So there's a lot of research work to be done to understand these systems and how using them for heat will impact the underground environment. There's also a lot of work to be done in reducing the costs and reducing the risk, so in innovating new tools and methods. And the observatory in Glasgow being at scale in real mines means it's a sort of stepping stone to commercial products. So the kind of areas people might be interested in is looking at water treatment, looking at all the data that's coming out, looking at big data analyses, testing new sensors, or looking at the geoengineering of the heat pumps and the heat exchangers and so on. And there's a lot more information available on the website that I've shown on this slide here, so ukgeos.ac.uk. So just to round up then, from both what Charlotte and I have said and also Nick previously, looking at this image on the right-hand side of the slide here, this is one of the heat maps that Nick showed a part of that both the Coal Authority and BGS have worked on. And you can see that across the UK there is a big opportunity for heat within the abandoned mines. And as Nick summarised, taking a liability towards a green recovery where we can use the mines for decarbonised heat and we can integrate them in heating and cooling networks. So hopefully Charlotte and I have given you some examples of real mine water energy schemes that are going in the UK, and also an underground laboratory in Glasgow where there's opportunity for research and innovation around this topic. And together those aspects will form hopefully part of the way heating in the UK changes to meet net zero carbon emissions targets. And so really, just to summarise, we think the mines are a great opportunity going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charlotte and Alison. That was brilliant. Can you hear me, by the way? Yes. Yeah. Thank you. And I really like the idea that you floated there, that the using the mine water energy give something back to the community once the coal has gone. We're a little bit behind, but there is one very specific question which I think I'd like to raise from Alicia Kremian from the Polish Mining Institute. Charlotte, she's asking if you can give any information about the cost of the investment and amortization period for the, I guess she's talking about the Glasgow project. But there might be another project where that question is more relevant.
If it's for Glasgow, then Alison will be best placed to answer that. I can speak briefly about some of our heat network projects. I mean, it's very hard to give a cost because it depends on the size of the heat network, the number of boreholes you need, whether you need boreholes or not. So it is very, very difficult. I mean, some of the local authorities that have been going for funding, I think the funding has been, in the region of something like £5 or £6 million for everything with the heat network included in that. But I don't know too much about the amortization period because obviously they're very much their projects. So we obviously are the energy supplier, but we're not involved in all the financials on their side. It is very variable because of the variety of the sources and the deployments. I don't know, Alison, if you want to add anything on Glasgow for that.
Nothing specifically, so thank you.
Or whether my colleague Nick would have anything to add on that as well with his involvement in some of our projects.
No, sorry, probably not at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Well, thanks for trying on that question. I think it's useful to know that roughly you're talking with the sort of magnitude of investment that you're talking about for a project like that. Thank you very much for that excellent presentation. Really interesting. We're in the interest of time, we'll move on swiftly to our next presenter, who is Simon Tillotson from ERM. Simon and ERM have vast experience in assessing the environmental aspects of mine closure projects. So without any further delay, let me hand over to Simon. Thank you, Simon.
So in the meantime, as I said, Simon Tillotson's my name, I'm a partner at ERM, and I've spent a number of years focusing not just only on mine closures, but on a wide range of closures throughout all industrial sectors. And I think a lot of the experience we have, both within ERM and externally, actually can be drawn into the whole case of coal transition through mine closures around this. So you go to the next slide, please. So I'm going to talk about sort of social as well as environmental aspects of the coal transition and the mine closures that come from it. I think one of the most important things is that this is all coming from the focus on climate change and the increasing commitments towards net zero emissions in the world by 2050. And the consequences of that 2/3 of this is by burning coal to generate electricity. What's been quite telling in the UK is that this in the last year, the levels of coal burning for electricity have dropped to the lowest since 1882, which is quite astonishing. And generally, we're moving almost entirely away from coal from a generation of electricity. So I think that's something that is really going to drive a lot of change around the world, and is continuing to do with the Just Transition initiatives in the EU and elsewhere. So I think there's a lot of challenges that are coming from this transition. South Africa is feeling the same. Australia, significant areas of Australia are coming up for mine closures, coal mine closures, and there's significant transition that's required. And so what are those challenges? What are the opportunities that come out of it? So there's huge amounts of risks, but also the real potential for opportunities that come out of it. So it's this whole idea of coal transition is a societal as well as an economic challenge. So it's not just about where do the new jobs come from. It's about the whole social and economic framework and fabric of areas. And so what's really needed is to look at the broad range of options and buy-in and a significant need for buy-in, so that there isn't that negative socioeconomic impact across the both local and regional scale from this. So how do you create that lasting positive legacy? The graph we've got on the right hand side of this slide is looking at where we need to get with our maturity in closure in order to achieve these things. Often when mines close, it's been focused on the physical and the chemical stability, so making sure that there isn't environmental impacts, making sure that things are left safe. But now there is an increasing need for that social transition and beneficial use from sites. So it's moving up the maturity, which also moves up the value scale, and make sure that you need to integrate and execute plans very, very carefully to be able to get the maximum benefit from that transition, or to minimise the impact from that transition. Next slide, please. One of the big things about the coal transition is that by the very nature of the geology and the coal measures sequences, they're concentrated problems in specific areas. So other mining, you may have a gold miner, you may have another nickel mine or whatever, and it's not necessarily a whole region that is impacted when they close. Where for coal, there's large areas of different countries where that makes a big impact. So it's not just an isolated impact; it's a wider impact. Now, Wales is South Wales in particular is an example of this. So at its peak in 1962, I think there was 620 mines employing 271,000 people in a relatively small area in South Wales. So as global economics shifted, the mines started closing through the 1970s, 1980s, and so there's large scale destitution, large scale impacts. South Wales became the sort of had the lowest educational standards of almost anywhere in the rest of the UK, and significant deprivation. So one of the measures that the UK government put in was developing forming the Wealth Development Agency, and as it says here, it was really focused on furthering the economic and social development of Wales, promoting efficiency in business, and pulling into international investments, creating environments for the inward investment and the regeneration of the area. And the WDA in itself was the key actor in this, channeling funds from central government and also from international governments and international developers and international investors. So they used this program over, and it in part is still going on. Over 1,000 sites were looked at, 7,800 hectares reclaimed, and seed funding of £350 million was invested over that time, which is a significant amount of money in the 70s and 80s and beyond. So this has been similarly seen in Germany in the close of the Eastern German lignite pits, and I'll come on to that in a few minutes. But the issue is that the social dynamic. The social dynamic, it provides the main driver. So the miners and the mining areas need to be willing to pursue that transition, and education is a real key within this. So next slide, please. So from the experience that we've had and we've worked on across the years and across the different regions of the world, I think there are a number of underlying principles that are quite common to a successful transition, whether it be coal or other industry. And I think there's a number of principles. So one of the first principles is that the mining operating phase is a temporary activity within the broader regional socioeconomic context. So it's really important to understand as you're moving through the transition as to how it can be looked at in terms of the wider context. What are the things that can be done? What are the skill sets that the miners and others have within the region? How can they be repurposed and reused. And because what you see is a lot of the mining sector areas have lots of skilled workers. So this is not about this is about having those transferable skills and retraining to make sure that you have a vibrant economy going forward, and that you don't get a brain drain and the movement of the skilled workers away to other areas. So in order to do that, as a mine operator, as a coal mine operator, you need to look beyond the fence. You need to look at more than just how you're going to deal with and make safe your mine site. So there is also a need to understand where the greatest risk constraints are and identify those opportunities and develop those opportunities way ahead of closure. A lot of the most successful mine closures have been where it's been a generation before closure where opportunities have identified, and those opportunities have been developed throughout the years, well ahead of closure. So there's a need to have all the stakeholders that could be impacted, or in the areas around that could be impacted by that closure, to get together and to understand what the opportunities are and how to work towards that. There's a need for funding, but that's not just local funding. That could be national. That could be international funding. It can be for private investors. It's looking to how you can attract investment into your area. So it's also, I think, having a clear vision and a clearly articulated vision on where you're trying to get to and what options are available and how those can be integrated together. So the picture here is again from South Wales, and it's the Ebervale Steelworks. I can talk about it a little bit later on, but the transition was from a significant employer of workforce and skilled workforce going, and then almost overnight changing to no workforce at all. So how could that be then? How could that site could then become a centre for a regeneration of that? And for Ebervale, that was linked to the concept of EDS and MEDS. So education and medicine became the focal points and the anchors for the redevelopment of that site. Next slide, please. So this transition, one of the things that we're very passionate about is that any transition needs to enable a different kind of conversation. So in a lot of cases, mine operators in of themselves are really focused on making sure that the environmental and social commitments are discharged, and the mine is made safe, and they're able to walk away with no liabilities. However, that doesn't actually make the best of the skill set of the workers, or indeed create the conditions whereby in the future there's a maintained and vibrant socio-economic fabric of the site. So what needs to be really important is that the mining companies themselves become actors in the system. So they're not the single proponents of that closure, but they work together with the region, the national governments and local communities to engage and create the right solution and have something that is sustainable and can be kept and maintained and developed upon as the years go by. So the diagram on the right hand side of the slide is really trying to show that there is a liability in the core environmental and social liabilities at the core of any mine closure, and there's the risk that surrounds that, but there's also a value and an opportunity that's around that, but only by moving the focus away from just at the site and widening out can you create those better opportunities for the future. Next slide, please. So one example of this, it's not a coal mining example, but it's of a smelter and refinery in Canada, and this was a site where in 2010 Vale announced that they were closing the smelter and refinery in Thompson with an estimated loss of 500 jobs within 5 years. So what really was done there, supported by ERM, was the recognition that they needed to really identify new economic opportunities and development opportunities to help reduce or turn around the impact of that closure. So in this case, the city of Thompson really became the focus and the fulcrum of driving that understanding of that change. They drew together in workshops and in links and partnerships, the city, the Chamber of Commerce, other governments, the mining company itself, and in this case, as well as 5 First Nations tribes that were impacted or potentially impacted by that. So this was done to create that working group. So we developed action plans to address bottlenecks in economic development, opportunities for diversification, and make sure that, and also formed a new regulatory framework and individual action plans that allowed that development. So that what was really the lesson that was really learnt by that was that they ensured both the local and regional stakeholders were fully engaged in the planning and understood where the opportunities were, and those opportunities were then reflected the desires and the enthusiasm of the local communities. Next slide, please. So the key thing, and some of the comments that have been coming in and questions have been coming in have been around the beneficial outcomes and what could good look like, or what are the opportunities that could be achieved by looking at repurposing and the options that are available, and looking at that as early as you possibly can. So don't leave it to the last second. Open up, look at the widest opportunities, focus studies to allow creative thinking to allow a range of options to come together. So this slide here, we just show a number of the potential opportunities are out there. There was a question about tourism, and sustainable tourism across the world is one of the big things. We're looking at opportunities in Australia. We're looking at opportunities all around the world in the sense of this. So I'll come on to in a minute about the East German lignite mines. A lot of that has been linked to a whole series of lakeland and tourism and leisure facilities that have been developed over the last 10, 15, 20 years. So in Wales, there's rally, there's car rally arena, there's zip wires, there's racing courses and everything being developed off the back of mining things. So there's a whole range of things you can do on the tourism, agriculture. There is a lot of hydroponic type farms and sustainable farming methods being developed. Kentucky coal mine, I think somebody commented on that. That is one example where a hydroponic farm has been developed from a coal mine. Clean energy is a very interesting area. There's a whole range of different elements around that. What has just been described on the heat from mine waters is a great idea. There's also carbon capture and storage is becoming a big issue. So storage of carbon. Obviously, there's the solar and the wind opportunities across that. One link between solar and hydrogen generation is the use of mine waters, and then either renewable energy from solar or wind being linked to essentially electrolysis and the creation of green hydrogen from mine waters. So you can create quite an interesting integration of those things. There's also methane, coal bed methane is an issue, an environmental issue and a social issue. There are technologies now being developed that can actually harness the methane and then convert the methane into hydrogen and acetylene or carbon black. So there's very interesting links around that. So those are sort of areas that can be all linked together, and that's pushing everything towards a hydrogen and electricity future. Waste management is another area where things can be used and has historically been used a lot. There's also data management and science, so data centers linked into areas such as this. And then, as I've briefly spoken about, there's the concept of sustainable developments based upon education and meds, or EDS and meds, So linking universities, developed universities, has been seen and has been great draws and great focuses of attention, and bringing both vibrance and energy and also ideas and drawing in new technologies or new industries in after them as you develop those educational areas. Medicine is becoming is clearly at the forefront of everybody's thoughts at the moment. So being able to link into that is quite important as well. So there's a whole range of things that need to be done, but these all need to be put into a vision that is created around it, that is bought into by everybody involved, but you also need to keep it flexible and iterative, and I think that's the key, because a site that may have thought that it was a great idea to have a diesel engine manufacturing plant there, perhaps is thinking a little bit differently, needs to change the focus with the way the world is moving. Next slide, please. So these are a few examples of how mining sites have been, mining and other industrial sites have been repurposed and have been and new ideas and new industries and new focuses of inward investment and economic value have been added. So from top to bottom, you've got the Eden project. So that's in southwest England, and that was an abandoned China clay pit, and there was a focus from the local economy and the local communities around what can we do with this. So that led to a transformation into an educational charity and a social enterprise, which attracts hundreds of millions of pounds worth of investment and revenues into the area, which relies substantially on tourism. So it became a magnet for tourism and for inward investment. The Stream Song Resort at the top right corner, that was an old phosphate mine which had been turned into a golf course and linked with tourism from that perspective as well. BP Landarcy was the first BP refinery in the world, and it closed down, and part of that master planning around it was to create a positive legacy through. It created innovative legal and shareholder mechanisms, but it was also centred on education. So that's the new Swansea University campus. So that became a focal point and a draw for inward investment. Ebbw Vale I've just been talking about, and that was really through the local and national government involvement and a drive towards the focus to increase the educational capacity of the region, create links through to the capital city of Wales, Cardiff, and create that different dynamic around the community. Next slide, please. So here's three or four more examples of it. I've talked briefly about the racecourse, in South Wales. The Lucian Lake district in Germany is where they've turned the end of coal, lignite coal, into an economic rebirth linked to tourism. They have an ideas competition each year, which develops new ideas for pursuits for economic value. There's a similar sort of activity being done in Australia at the moment called the Great Latrobe Park, which is planned to have 6,000 hectares of open strip mines repurposed into parkland, into wetlands, and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of different ways that this can be done. The Lady of the North. That's an interesting coal mine that created a landform that creates a interest in tourism, which pulls in tourists and is a springboard for economic stimulus as well. So lots of different ways that things can be linked together and things can be used. Next slide, please. So just finally, these are the things that we think are really important as conditions for successful regeneration and repurposing. So having a vision, develop it from the outside iteratively and follow it through with examining all the options that are available. Understand the local context. You need to understand the environmental, social and economic conditions, back it with data and link in and make sure that everybody is involved with understanding and creating that vision. Look at mechanisms to protect in terms of liability, create leadership. We find that a lot of the really successful solutions that are done are by innovative and entrepreneurial leaders who drive that, have credibility and create collaborative relationships with all stakeholders. Funding is hugely important. So wherever that funding comes from, have a real plan and a real understanding of where you need to get to, and then create that funding plan around it and look at where you can get the funding from, public, private, a whole range of different things are possible. And then it's also need to measure the outcomes. So establish systems for managing, measuring performance against objectives. Always have the eye on the prize and understand where you're trying to get to. Okay, that's it. Hopefully that I've kept to time reasonably, and hopefully that's given you a flavour of the things that are possible and are being done at the moment. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Simon. Thanks very much. That's very helpful sort of holistic view of the topic, and how and the many different ways that mine sites can be repurposed, and some brilliant examples of repurposing for tourism. Actually, one of the other topics you mentioned was repurposing for clean energy, and that's exactly where we're going now, because our next presentation is from Ferenc Kish, who works for RSK, and he will talk about projects that they've worked on for financing mechanisms for solar PV on post-mining sites. So over to you, Ferenc. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Tim. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak in front of you. And I believe my voice and my screen can be seen. So it was really exciting to travel around the UK with the help of Simon and Nick, and I would like to continue this travel, and not only looking at a UK example, but I would like to show you some examples from Hungary, where I am actually based. And before I would jump to my slides, let me just share a phenomena what I always wondered when I have seen solar PV sites at brownfield areas. One was the technical part, how it was built there technically at a former mining site or a slurry site. And the other part was how it was financed, where the money came from and who was paying for that installation. And with my presentation, I would like to give examples for both questions. But before this, let me just quickly introduce RSK. We are an environmental and engineering service business. And as you see on the map, we have over 100 offices, more than half of them in the UK. But we have offices all across Europe, including Poland and Hungary, for example, where I am right now. And we are the largest privately owned environmental and sustainability firm in Europe. And for the energy sector, we are also one of the largest service providers. The company started 30 years ago with 3 people. And today we have more than 5,500 people as colleagues. And just one element to mention that regarding contaminated land consulting, RSK was selected by the environmental analyst 5 times in a row to the top league. So, and how RSK delivers services, I think it's very important to mention. And this is the reason why I am here at this event, because we try to integrate also geographically our experiences from the UK, from different sectors, And we try to implement in Europe with offices locally, but also globally. We have colleagues working all across Asia. We just expanded to Hong Kong, to Singapore, and this gives us really the opportunity to deliver vertically integrated solutions. And one example that I brought from a surface mining site from Kutakre. This is near Bolton. This is an example where exactly this vertical integration took place. And why am I saying this? This area near Bolton, it was a coal mining site for over 2 centuries. It is about 4 square kilometers area. And the manager of the land, Harworth Group, was looking for utilization of the area. Here, the mining took place until 2011. And RSK was assigned to do the geotechnical and chemical assessment at the area, looking at the open cast backfill and also developing solution for each plot of the former mine. And I think this was the key of the project, that the future utilization of the area was designed accordingly or according to the future purpose of the land. This image shows like an intermediate status of the project, but what I am talking about is the end result. And as you can see, logistics centers, parking lots, access roads, and actually even a solar farm was also established in the area. And I think this is the key point, that depending on how you want to use the area, this was the basis of all the interventions, both in terms of the design and the implementation of the measures. And there was a question about social impact. So in this case, at that logistics center, today more than 4,000 people employed. There is the location for Aldi, Amazon, and several other manufacturing companies found their space. So not only the location was created for new businesses, but also this was an employment opportunity. And now let me take you to Hungary. And actually this image is from an award winner, Hungarian journalist, photographer, Ákos Tiller. And this image is at Mátra power plant at the former slurry deposit of the largest coal power plant of Hungary. And as I mentioned in my introduction, when I have seen such images of solar panels, I started wondering, in the last 5 years, I had the privilege to travel to many of the Hungarian solar plants. I always ask the people there, okay, I understand the technical features. I read about how many solar panels are installed, but I always wanted to know how the financing happened. And here I list 5 different schemes, and I would like to give you examples. These are all actually viable schemes. As you will see, the power plants are there, operational. And if you look behind the scenes, you will see the different structures. So the one in Visonta at the former power plant, this was established in 2015. It is a 16 megawatt solar plant at a former slurry deposit. This was financed by a 50% tax incentive. So a tax incentive was granted for the power plant operator by the Hungarian government, and 50% was own financing. I'm not saying this is a common solution, but back in 2015, this was the largest solar PV plant in Hungary, and let's say as a exceptional construction of financing, this was working. And there was a question about outdoor activities or tourism. So actually this site can be visited for technical people, and based on arrangement with the power plant, there is a visitor platform, and actually the power plant staff operating special vehicles to climb up to the power plant. So there is a way to utilize the site and give access to people who are interested. And another important aspect in this case, that actually the power plant staff was trained to operate the solar PV plant, and they themselves were trained for assessing different panel types, what kind of transformers and what kind of architecture to be implemented. So in this respect, the technical people already part of the transition for the clean energy, which is, I think, a very good example. There is another power plant. This was established 1 year later at Pécs. It is also a former slurry deposit of the heat power plant at Pécs. Here, the financing structure was at the end of the EU financing period. There were still environmental budget to be spent on communal clean energy projects, but actually there was not enough time to design and set at over 60 public buildings in Pécs solar panels. It was more cost efficient to put all these capacity into one place and to establish a 10 megawatt peak capacity solar PV plant at this particular site, with the exclusive contract that only public buildings, those 60 plus buildings operating all along Pécs city, will benefit from this renewable power. And on this way, 5 billion forint was paid as a direct subsidy. If you would ask, this is about 1.3 million euro per megawatt, which is at that time, that was the market price for such a facility. For brownfield areas, there is also an example not far from Pécs, also in the same county, a village called Pellért. This is an area where the solar PV operator signed a 30 years long-term lease with the slurry owner or operator called Mitigation. And actually this 30 years contract gives the land access, and the Hungarian feed-in tariff system, which was available until the end of 2016, the feed-in tariff was available for the small solar plants. And the reason you see, let's say, small pieces of the solar power plant is the nature of that feed-in tariff scheme, which was aimed only for 0.5 megawatt projects. But on this way, actually, many other brownfield sites has been utilized in Hungary. And here, compared to the previous examples, not the investment, but the feed-in tariff made the project financially viable. As time passed and we are in 2021, there is an even further step towards a close to market mechanism for financing solar projects, but still there is a way to, let's say, incentivize brownfield projects. And today the Hungarian renewable energy financing scheme, or the auction scheme, puts a preferential role to brownfield areas. This means that this is an auction scheme where you can bid for a certain price of the electricity, what you will produce from renewable energy. And if there are two projects at the same price level, the one planning to establish the project on brownfield will be preferred. And there were two auctions in Hungary in 2019 and 2020. And in 2020, there were 32 cases when this brownfield status was claimed. And actually in 18 cases, the winner project was on brownfield area. Actually, none of those are ready to operational yet. So on this image, I'm showing another brownfield project, but that was financed under the previous feed-in tariff scheme. And there is a fifth element which was also discussed in the introduction of Tim. This is a direct EU funding, and this is also a very recent news from Hungary. About 2 weeks ago, it was announced that the European Union is contributing 9 million euros to the transitional planning of the largest coal power plant in Hungary, the Matra power plant. So there will be transitional planning undertaken, certain flexible solutions, actually solar PV is one of those, will be developed. And as the questions were raised from the audience, there will be dedicated programs for an energy community and also training for the local inhabitants. So this is one example, and I collected these 5 financing schemes, and actually the options are not, this is not the end of the options, because for example power purchase agreements are possible in some countries. There is an example from Poland. Heidelberg Cement recently signed a solar PV power purchase agreement, so a completely market-based financing for a solar project. And this will also come to Hungary soon. So that will be also a mechanism that former coal mines or brownfield areas can be space for solar project developments. So this was my presentation and my thoughts, and I will be open for questions.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much, Ferenc. I think this is an area which has huge potential in our region, of course, because on the one hand, now the market conditions for solar PV and wind actually are greatly improved in the last couple of years. Plus, of course, the costs of investment costs have fallen significantly, especially for solar PV. And on the other hand, you have the opportunity for for tapping into the Just Transition program on former coal sites. So I think all of it adds up to quite an attractive package. We do actually have one specific question from Mr. Tomáš Burdič from the Ministry of Regional Development in the Czech Republic. He wants to ask, what about the aesthetic issue do you consider the aesthetical issues in preparing your projects? I guess he means the sort of visual aspect of putting in a solar PV site.
Actually, it varies from country to country. So depending on what are the authority requests, but for sure there is a landscaping team working on visual interpretation of future solar plants. And what I know, for example, from the Hungarian practice, that in certain parts of the country, authorities requiring, for example, tree cover or certain vegetation cover around solar farms, often it not comes in a very fortunate situation. I mean, you don't want to have many trees around your solar panels as a shading impact, but this can sort it out. And there are examples where such a landscape solution can happen. But what is a more interesting tendency is how solar PV plants can be used for biodiversity enhancement. And if you think that you are fencing off hundreds of hectares for 20 years, it is just as good for the biodiversity because less disturbance, and much of the area can be good for bee keeping, for example, and there are incentives for other biodiversity enhancement of the area. So actually solar PV can even add to the natural values rather than take more away.
Thank you, Ferenc. That's a brilliant angle on biodiversity. A good place to close your presentation. Thank you very much. Very interesting. And we're going to develop the theme now a little bit further because we have Ruth Apps from Gravitricity, who's going to talk about using coal shafts to store energy. So again, this is about what Simon called driving beneficial outcomes in the direction of clean energy. Thank you, Ruth.
Thank you, Tim. Can you hear me okay? Yep. I'll just wait for my slides to load. So my name's Ruth. I work for this company called Gravitricity. We are an R&D engineering company developing a new form of energy storage. We are based in Edinburgh. And basically what you're seeing here is an artist's rendering of what our system will look like when it's actually deployed. Next slide, please. So, its formatting's gone a bit wrong here. So basically, Gravitricity was founded in 2011. What we are doing is we are developing this new form of energy storage. It's a mechanical form of energy storage, and we basically take old coal shafts or old mine shafts, and we basically put winches at the top, which act as our generators, and we lower and raise a weight up and down to store electricity. We are developing our technology through a series of industrial partnerships and regional collaborations with existing mine owners, with local authorities, with our Dutch winch partner Houseman, who are building the winches for us, and electricity network operators. We're very small at the moment. We are basically 10 engineers, and but we aim to be growing. If any mining engineers out there, we are hiring later in the year, so drop us a line. We have to date 7 patents on our system, and 4 granted, 3 pending. And basically, the key about Gravitricity's energy storage system is that the components of it are all in existing technologies, but we're reconfiguring it in a new, novel way. Basically, the winches combined with the weights, the winches act as generators to store, as I said, electricity. Next slide, please. So if you're unfamiliar with energy storage, there's basically 4 types, as you see from the top image. We form in mechanical energy storage. So we sit with pumped hydro, compressed air, and flywheels. Where we sit in this little white space that's just between all the chemical forms of energy storage and the mechanical forms of energy storage. So that basically from 1 megawatt up to 20 megawatts, from sub 1 second up to hour duration. So our system is reconfigurable according to your needs, which makes it really adapt for the energy transition that's coming. Next slide, please. And this is why we need lots more energy storage of all kinds. The world is moving to renewables. The more renewables you put on your electricity networks, the wind doesn't always blow when you need it to. When you need your electricity, you need forms of energy storage to take that excess electricity, store it for when you do need it, or you basically use storage to prevent having to pay for new electricity upgrades. So what we do is we take an existing asset, a mine site, we put our system in, and then that turns the site itself into a new form of energy storage that can participate in this energy transition and participate in the green renewable transition. What makes it particularly useful is that mine sites themselves tend to have excellent electricity connections. If they've just come out of use, some of them are in quite a very good condition. And then you've also got it's already an industrial asset, and our system itself is designed to fit in a 30 meter by 30 meter shed, and it's all underground, most of it. So that means there's no real visual impact, which is useful. So then you can build other things around it. You can do like you put your renewables on the site, or you could even put your shopping centres, as they do in Edinburgh, on whole quarries and things. So there's lots of things you can do around. You've still got the whole site basically to play with for other things you want to do with it. Bloomberg New Energy Finance estimates that the energy storage market is going to be worth $620 billion by 2050. That's not going to be all forms of mechanical energy storage like pumped hydro and us. It will be mostly, a lot of it will be lithium ion, because a lot of it will go into homes. But there is a significant growth opportunity there. Next slide, please. So basically, what makes us unique is that we can go from we have a reconfigurable system. It's sub 1 second response. So electricity networks need things called need things called ancillary services to help keep the electricity flowing so the lights stay on. You get paid a lot of money for those services in certain regions. We can provide ancillary services because we have that sub 1 second, so we can do fast frequency response. We've designed the system, and this is comparable to lithium ion, to be a long life asset, which makes it a very useful asset on any electricity network. Basically, we are designed for at least a 25-year lifetime. Lithium ion only has a 7-year lifetime, and it suffers from loss of discharge as it gets towards the end of its life. We don't have that problem. That weight goes up and down that shaft in propriety, assuming that nothing has happened to the shaft. That's fine. It's versatile, so obviously you can vary, as I said, according to what you need. So if you need a short output for 15 minutes, it can do that, or it can do something longer duration output for hours if you need it. So it's really useful that way. Another thing that often makes us unique to other systems is that there's no chemistry. That means it's got no risk of explosion. That means that it can go into places. If you would sink a purpose-sunk shaft, and I'll come on to this, you could theoretically put our system into, say, chemical plants or on their industrial sites where they can then put on renewables. Next slide, please. That's roughly the technical characteristics. Now, it's all nice having all these visual diagrams that artists have beautifully rendered for us, but actually it's actually getting it into existence. That's what we're working on. So the demonstrator you see here on the left is what we're currently building. It's actually been built as of yesterday in the docks in Leith in Edinburgh. It is an above ground system, simply of 1/20th of the scale of a full size system, to do the testing that the electricity companies need to connect to their networks. Obviously, they're very protective of their networks, and they want to make sure any new form of energy storage technology doesn't damage them. So this is for testing. It's also for testing as design engineering models and how the weights and the winches interact. If you want to come and visit, you're more than welcome. Just drop me a line. COVID permitting, of course, but we will be doing hosting them by video as well, so you can have a tour of the site. I primarily work on moving this idea of the demonstrator into a full-scale system. So I'm working on the first of a kind project. That will be a 4 to 8 megawatt system. We have 2 sites that are currently front runners, one in GB or one in the Czech Republic. We don't know which is going to be the first. So it is a bit of a competition between the 2 project teams to see which one gets over the line first. But that will basically, we're developing that with a range of partners, local partners in their areas. And basically that's going to give us a full scale, a full system integration, and basically see how all the components come together. Then primarily after we've done that, so we aim to have start construction in 2022 for that first full scale system. We'll move on to do more projects, more learning from 2023. And then we aim to ultimately end up with sinking new purpose sunk shafts. And this is actually taking existing mining knowledge and applying it to sinking new shafts. What makes that unique is that significantly reduces the costs, because we don't have to go as deep, because we get the correct diameter for the weights. And then what makes it more interesting from an energy storage solution perspective is we are no longer geographically constrained to mining regions. And then that means we can go into areas where they would love pumped hydro, but can't have it because they've got, say, constraints on water, or they just don't have the geography to have water going up and down a mountain. Then that means that we're basically taking existing expertise and knowledge from one industry and reapplying it into the new green energy revolution, basically. And that's actually giving life to those people with those skills, a future career for those people with those skills in a new, exciting industry. I think electricity is exciting. Next slide, please. So here's more pictures of our demonstrator. It's no longer in kit form. It's all come together. So it's, as I said, it's basically to de-risk the project. You're going out into a full-scale system. You want to do a test, a scale version before you get there. The aim is to have it, after we finish testing with it, we are trying to find a home for it, hopefully with a research institute. We've got a few interested parties. So if any of you head over for COP26, you'll be able to see it then. So that's quite exciting. Next slide, please. So as I said, Gravitricity is developing, using its R&D pipeline, and then eventually when we get to the system is working in a number of projects, we just aim to become manufacturers of the kit, and then other people can come and take it and then use their geotechnical expertise or mining engineering expertise of their sites and put it on their mine sites, and then they can provide energy storage for any, say, renewable projects they want to install on that asset. This is where you're going to take existing knowledge from the mining industry and repurpose it into something new and exciting for the electricity sector, so that the electricity sector itself can grow. The costs for grid infrastructure upgrade, Bloomberg New Energy Finance estimate is going to take worldwide for new electricity grids, for upgrading existing electricity networks, about 300 billion per year up to 2040 to get it ready for the renewable transition. There's a lot of potential out there for other forms of energy storage. So this is a direct link to taking the knowledge we have in the mining engineering sector and putting it into a new part of the assets needed for the electricity sector. Next slide, please. There has been lots of interest in what we do. Firstly, Gravitricity itself is based in Scotland. As you've probably, Scotland has had a long mining heritage. We are in Edinburgh. There is mines just on the outskirts of Edinburgh. They're all the way across the Central Belt. You've seen the pictures so many times today from the Coal Authority. People who can remember them being in operation are really excited to see them being used for something else that they can see that's actually going to benefit the green revolution as they see it. There's lots of talk about just transition. It's something that we get asked frequently. People ask us what our opinions are on a just transition in coal regions, what sort of solutions are out there for various towns. Basically, a lot of Australian colleagues reach out to us just to find out about the legacy, the interest we have, and basically what learnings we've come across when we've come into to say find a site. So how do people feel about putting in a system like ours into a mine that's coming out of closure? It's always been for us positive, because the people who have the site want to see something happen with it. They don't just want to see it closed and have a cap put on the shaft. That's been probably one of the biggest feedbacks we get from our shareholders who've invested in us to date, that they like the idea of them having a life after they've finished mining. We have an enthusiastic bunch of shareholders. They often send me sites they found in their gardens or in their local area. Certainly the Cornish and the Welsh contingent are very excited about where their mines are. We can operate, Gravitricity's system is designed to operate in a shaft that is filled with water. Obviously, for our first of a kind projects, that won't be the case, but because of that, there's no real constraints on if they have filled with water. So that's a benefit. Lots of press, as I said, has come because I think we've just sort of hit the green transition, and of course of COP26 and being based in Scotland, that's always a benefit. And finally, I think this is often a lot of discussion in Scotland about how do we encourage people into the renewable sector. And I think Scotland's got a big oil and gas sector, and I think it's the case of that. For us is that when we get applications, what we are looking for from engineers who want to make that change, we're looking for ones who've at least there's a sense of lifelong learning, that we know we can't, no one wants to basically throw their career start from the beginning again. So there somehow needs to be a parity, a step of like some sort of remedial training to move from one sector into, say, an analogous sector. It's not just about just saying any old jobs, it's about creating the right kind of high quality jobs, and also enabling people who want to leave their sectors, who say, for example, want to leave, I know the oil and gas sector well, who want to leave the oil and gas sector, to allow them to retire and say that they don't want to retrain and they just want to retire, and allow them to do so, but also to I think this is to thank them for their service. I think something that's always forgotten in this just transition is that we wouldn't have the society we have and all the wonderful gadgets without the likes of the oil and gas sector, without the likes of the mining and coal regions. And we need to thank those people who've made that possible before we just sort of abandon them and say, oh, we're going to move on to renewables now. It's no good. We need to thank them properly, and then allow the ones who want to retire and leave, and then take the people who want to transition into a new sector on that journey, but without just giving them good quality jobs. It's a hard problem to solve. It's one that at Gravitricity we discuss quite frequently, even though we're a small company, because we get asked quite a lot about it. But basically, I think it's this idea when we look at people coming in from other forms of engineering and coming in wanting to come into the electricity sector and into developing, we just look at have they had a history of lifelong learning and how can they apply that. Next slide. I think that's the end of my presentation. I have whizzed through it, so that is it. But if you have any questions, you can email me at info@gravitricity.com or ruth.apps@gravitricity.com.
Thank you so much, Ruth. That's brilliant. It's a great idea, and it fits so well with the previous presentation on having solar PV on former mining sites, and then you have the energy storage that goes alongside that. And well done to your company as well for the approach you take to sort of social inclusion and social justice. That's fantastic. I don't see any questions immediately on there is one question actually from Alicia Kremian, again from the Mining Institute in Poland, about the cost of the coal shaft maintenance over a 25-year project. I don't know if you can say something about that. Thanks.
Yeah, no, we can. We actually undertook, we undertook a couple of studies with Imperial College London, because obviously we factored them into the cost of storage. So when you compare to, say, other forms of energy storage, you're looking at over the lifetime. And so we have two reports on it on a levelized cost of storage, and we were significantly cheaper, even when we had considered mine maintenance and say any refurbishment needed or any other geotechnical engineering to put the foundations in for our winches. If you want to have a copy of those reports or have a look at how we worked it out, then I'm more than happy to share them. Just drop me an email, but we just don't put them on our website.
Thank you, Ruth. And yes, it's a good moment to point out to everyone that we will be circulating the presentations and the video recording of the webinar, so you will be able to follow up with all the presenters afterwards. Thank you very much, Ruth. We'll move on to our last presentation, and we're pretty much almost on time, not too bad, considering we've picked up a few questions along the way. And this last presentation is from Henry Lang, who is Director of Inshore Environmental Consulting. He's an environmental and geological consultant with many years of experience in the sector, and Henry's going to talk about his experience on some of the UK coal site reclamation projects. Thank you, Henry.
Thank you very much, and if I could have the slides, please. Thank you very much. Headline, I suppose, coal mine closure. Can we deliver a sustainable legacy? Over a picture of one of the mine sites I've been involved in over the years, in its earlier derelict form post-closure. I think in summary, I could say very quickly the answer is yes, but next slide, please. Quick summary of who we are: a small independent environmental consultancy, active both in the UK and in Africa, where we tend to be dealing with gold mine closure and other mining assets. And the purpose of this presentation is to cover some of what we have learned in the UK with some of the sites I've been looking at, and some examples of good and bad practice from our experience. Because of the legacy issues in the UK, and picking up the points that other people have already made, some of the lessons we've learned by default of how not to do it, partly because closure planning wasn't always part of the plan in the beginning. Next slide, please. And mine closure plans generally, and I think picking up on comments made previously, does one size fit all? The answer is quite clearly no. It doesn't make it much difference whether you're dealing with deep or open cast. Each mine has its own specific context in terms of both national, regional and local significance. You have, as already been raised by others, and questions from the floor, should we say, as to the social and wider community impacts vary from mine to mine, and it depends again on the region. Direct and indirect employment, we've got to remember that within all these mining communities, it's not just the direct employment, it's not just the people working down the pit, it's all the associated businesses, the people who sell them their newspaper, who sell them food, who sell the mine additional engineering services, transport. All of these ancillary activities are only there because of the mining activity and the economic activity that's associated with the mine, again, whether it's open cast or deep mine. The environmental implications have to be considered. We've already touched with other speakers on water, groundwater, mine water, and also surface water impacts. Methane in mines has always been a major risk and an impact issue in the past. If you don't need, we may not be using canaries down mines anymore, but methane in its own right can present an opportunity, as well as being a far worse greenhouse gas than any of the carbon gases. We have to think that methane is in its own right a significant energy source. And as was covered by speakers from the Coal Authority, mine and tip stability are ongoing issues, and they have to be considered in legacy terms over a very long period. Deep mine stability issues can continue for a very long period, and as we've seen recently in Wales, tip stability, just because it's been standing there for 30 years doesn't mean that climate change isn't now having material impacts on the geotechnics, the hydrogeology of long-standing coal tips, whether they're backfilled into open cast mining voids or whether they're actually sort of tall conical tips. And I suppose God preserve us all from disasters like the Aberfan one, where over 120 people, mostly children, were killed back in the 60s when a large mine tip collapsed onto a community that was built at its foot and smothered a village school in the process. And out of all of these issues we find other risks, insurance risks, flood risks, and geohazards that are of concern to not just the property sector, but those who insure the property sector. Next slide, please. So a lot of the issues we've already been talking about today, but if we're in a new area that is still actively mining, we have to start planning as soon as possible for what comes next. We need to identify all the associated issues with local stakeholders and national stakeholders. And by stakeholders, I in essence mean not just the miners, but the wider community, the connected community, as well as further afield, other businesses that rely, other communities that rely on pits. Certainly here in the UK, there were mine accommodation villages that were set up and established that were quite a distance from the pits themselves, because one community serviced 3 or 4 pits. And when the pits went, those communities were hit very hard. You also need to consider redevelopment, the physical redevelopment constraints. So yes, subsidence is there and spoil heap stability, but contamination, many of these sites can be quite heavily contaminated, groundwater and rising mine water. And we've already touched in our talk so far about active or passive treatment, lagoons and reed beds, such as the one in the picture on the right. They can become in their own right strong focuses for biodiversity and community assets and recreational assets. But then, depending what we're wanting to do with the site, whether it's energy generation or new development or new commercial development, we need to think about the infrastructure. Now, most pits in the UK relied heavily on rail infrastructure. Most of the coal was shipped out by rail, but they tended to have fairly poor road access. You need to consider road access today, and there are even sites, certainly across Europe, where river and canal access, wharfage, is still important in terms of how the coal is shipped out to market or to power stations. So those are issues, and one I didn't put in there as a piece of infrastructure, but which has been touched on by the speakers about PV and gravitricity, is mines tend to have in their own right high energy demand, therefore usually have good energy input infrastructure. There is the opportunity, if it's competent, to repurpose that and use it for energy export. Next slide, please. And these sites do bring a lot of opportunities. As part of the mine planning, as part of the closure planning, we really need to think about those opportunities in a wider context. Most of the speakers before me have touched on how we have to consider these things holistically. You cannot plan a mine closure effectively or sustainably as a small case, site by site specific approach. If we've got a region, and I'm going to touch on a region that's close to me in a minute, where there were half a dozen pits that closed over a period of time and then 4 that shut in rapid order, that becomes a regional impact. It's not a site-by-site impact. So we have to think about it on a regional scale. Look at the opportunities for combined regeneration, not single use, mixed use. One of the things we're seeing a lot of in the UK on legacy sites now is the use of nature-based solutions, both for open pit or spoil reclamation. That can lead to real biodiversity enhancements. We talked a lot about integrated energy and heat recovery. those can be really useful. And certainly if you look at the picture on the right, we're looking at expanding that to take account of this. And therefore we need to consider what are the high energy heat and water uses. This picture on the right there is in Kent. It's an operation called Thanet Earth, play on words because it's on the Isle of Thanet. It is the largest glasshouse complex in the UK, and some of these numbers still amaze me. It's hydroponics. Those glass houses are typically 2 to 3 stories high, and annually they produce 400 million tomatoes, 30 million peppers, red and green, and 24 million cucumbers per annum, which go into the food chain in the UK. That's all done with closed loop hydroponics systems. The water mostly comes off the roofs of those glass houses, are collected in lagoons, and traditionally, and they're not that old, but the initial sites were set up with CHP systems, and we are, because this operation is over the coal field in Kent, we are now looking at this being expanded to make use of heat recovered and water recovered from some of the mine sites I'm going to be talking about shortly. The other thing we're looking at on a couple of mine sites I'm familiar with are eco centres and village housing, where in essence all of the above features are integrated into new communities and villages. Next slide, please. And I'm going to talk specifically about the Kent coalfield, sitting right in the southeast corner of the UK. It's actually closer to Europe than London. It's closer to Europe than it is to London. If you look at where Dover is, that's only a few miles from France. And the Kent coalfield had a legacy of pits, most of which, as you can see from the dates shown here, were shut in the 80s. Betsanger Colliery, 2 main shafts, 648 and 739 meters. Chislet Colliery, up on the top left, 1914 to 1969, 450 meter and 447 meter deep shafts. Snowdown, which is 913 and 940, and Tilmanston Colliery, 966 and 957. Now, of those, one was known within the mining community as Dante's Inferno because it was so hot that mine workers actually predominantly worked naked, just because the pit was so hot. Each of those pits shown there has their own mining community or ex-mining community built up around it. Villages grew up. And the odd thing is, in terms of community, is that those mines and their associated workers were actually stuck out like a dog's leg in terms of Kent, which is known as the Garden of England. It produces and has always produced a high proportion of fruit and vegetable for London. And the miners mined here were predominantly imports from the Welsh coalfields. So they weren't really socially integrated, even when the mines were operating. And when the mines closed, the social exclusion and the impact on these pit communities was phenomenal. And the level of, I suppose, community degradation was horrendous. We ended up with all sorts of community issues in these mines, and a lot of work has gone into regeneration. And the closure of those pits was partly economics, but there was an element of politics involved as well. And so, and that tied into the miners' strike and other community issues and politics of the time. Next slide, please. Looking at some of the examples of those pits, Chislet Colliery, village of Hersden. If you look at the black and white picture on the left, you can see the community of Hersden, top left. nearly the entirety of that village worked within the pit or was associated with it. That shut in 1969. It was one of the earlier ones to close. That was predominantly down to poor geology. It was too fractured. The shafts were uneconomic. They flooded rapidly, but the site itself was rail connected. We have the River Stour, which is an extremely sensitive watercourse running between the pit and the spoil heap, which is shown as a sort of the grey area in the south of the picture. If you work to this site now, we have partial regeneration. Recovery there is ongoing. The advantage this colliery site had is it has decent road access. Sadly, the village and community railway halt was abandoned and is in the bottom left corner of the pictures, still there, derelict. But if you look at the top right of the 2021 picture, it shows light industrial regeneration. We have the NHS having a number of offices there. We have manufacturing. We have infrastructure now in there for, I suppose, a number of industrial units. But the actual pit head and the old pit buildings form the green area in the bottom left. That has issues due to slope stability because we're looking at a sort of quite a steep slope. A number of schemes have come forward for residential housing and mixed use development. The shafts are still present, and I'm currently involved with one of the developers of the industrial units on the right to explore heat recovery options for the expansion of light industry onto that vacant area. That is something that is in discussion with the planning authority, and the advantage there is that what he's looking at is relatively high employment, because that community is still, even though it's only a few miles from the historic city of Canterbury, is still quite a depressed community. It has a number of issues with drug use and alcoholism, and these are some of the legacy issues that we still find in these Kent coalfield communities. Next slide, please. Tillotson Colliery, shut. Oh, back one, please. That's it. Tillotson. Initial reclamation shown in the picture on the left in 1990. A lot of physical earth moving needed to reprofile the spoil heaps that were associated with this deep mine that shut in 86. It's now become a centre for food processing, taking advantage of all the fruit and veg that is grown elsewhere in Kent. We have Tillotson salads in that large white building at the bottom there. A number of the other buildings on the right are distribution centres of one form or another and road haulage associated. The infrastructure to this site is not that good, but because of the shafts that are here, food and distribution, if you think of food preparation, it has a very high demand for chilling, and studies are underway at the moment to use recovered heat from the mine shafts through heat exchangers to basically power the chillers. It's slightly less efficient than actually going for heat generation, but when you look at the cost of energy and the rising costs of energy, this is an area that lends itself to that. And I think I'm aware of at least one conversation going on in terms of the potential for small-scale PV on the former spoil area. Next slide, please. Bettshanger Colliery, again, you can see the small community, sort of oval ring of houses at the top left of the picture, still there today. The colliery site has been reclaimed. There was a lot of use of nature-based solutions to convert the actual colliery site itself into parkland. That's been very successful. It's used for various community activities now and is popular as a wider community resource. Various public events are held there, including concerts of one form or another. And then coming back to what I was saying about Thanet or Thanet Earth, if you look in the top corner of this site, we have Intercrop, who have established glass houses on the site. They initially were not connected to any form of heat recovery system, but that is again being explored because glass houses lend themselves, particularly in the UK, where it's not always that warm, glass houses really lend themselves to heat recovery systems. But again, you've got to remember that actually these mines here closed without any real form of forward planning or closure planning, because it was politically driven. There was no great forward thinking as to what would happen. So here we're having to deal with legacy issues and legacy community issues after the event, which isn't always beneficial. Next slide, please. Snowdon Colliery is sadly one of the ones that's got away. Pictured there, very large colliery complex in the 1960s. It was shut in 1987. This is one where the actual community that worked here didn't live at Pithead. They lived in a purpose-built village, Aylesford, a couple of miles away, that is only now starting to recover as predominantly distribution and transport links have opened up to it, enabling it to be expanded and new jobs to work in. But the actual pit itself, possibly because it's not so associated with the community, sits in its still derelict form. The picture on the right shows the remaining pit buildings still there, predominantly derelict area. There's been no strategy effective for the site. Irritatingly, there is a rail halt there that's still used by a few in the local community. The irritating thing is it's an asset that's underutilized that could be used for so much more. And all of those buildings and all of that land is just sitting there. There have been, to my knowledge, 3 or 4 different schemes brought forward. They have all failed due to one reason or another. The last one, irritatingly, which was for repurposing of the buildings for light industrial starter units and for conversion of some of the site to glamping, community access and recreation, and in parallel a scheme for PV on part of the coal sites. That died in 2018, or stalled in 2018, and then just as they were trying to resurrect it, COVID hit. So that's been parked, but may well come forward again. And certainly I'm in discussions with a couple of developers who are interested in actually taking on the entirety of the site from an eco-village point of view, looking again at mine recovery, use of recovered water from these mines for strategic supply to a new purpose-designed community that's designed from the outset to provide employment, close to home, and heat systems. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Can you hear me? Thank you. Now, this is not in Kent, but is one of, I suppose, from my perspective, more of a success story. Worksop is a town in the East Midlands. It had a couple of mines around it. Steatley Colliery had as a site some of the most integrated and complex issues I've ever come across. When I first came across it, I said, it's not a site, it's an exam question, it's a university project. But it existed there as, at that point, a legacy site becoming derelict. We have a deep mine that was suffering rising mine water. If you look in the bottom corner of that, there is what was a methane recovery and power generation, where methane was brought out, put through a Stark ignition engine and used for electricity generation. That failed as mine water was rising. The large building complex in the middle of the site to the top was a refractory works that used output from the mine and from the big, deep, open cast lime quarry on the left. So limestone quarry. We had spoil pits that had been tipped into previous sections of the limestone quarry. We had local authority landfill in the bottom left corner that had been put into the limestone quarry and then covered in colliery spoil. We had a rising aquifer within the limestone, so that quarry was pumped dewater, and the water, at the moment the pumps were turned off, was rising at a rate of 600 millimeters per annum. So as soon as the quarry was stopped, as the pumping stopped in the quarry, rising groundwater basically converted it quite quickly into a lake, and the whole site had very poor road access via minor local roads. And a client of mine looked at it and thought it had opportunity. He wanted to buy it. Next slide, please. So we looked at this site. We flagged up all of the issues, and the client about that. I've done a deal to buy it. The amount he bought it for was completely negligible. It was a nominal sum. Somebody told me of £100 for a site of this size. The legacy costs, remedial costs, were going to run into millions. So that was probably a reasonable price to pay. And a site generation was developed and drawn up and agreed between the two local authorities, because the site actually straddled two local authority areas, and Langer Rourke. And how do we address all those legacy concerns and problems? We agreed a new road access onto a main road. We came up with a remediation strategy to deal with the expensive and extensive remediation needed, particularly under the refractory works. The plan was to develop a manufacturing hub, but also for Langer Rourke to relocate part of their offices, to develop part of the site for recreation, to take advantage of the rail connection for future rail links, for manufacturing off-site, removal by rail, plans for heat recovery and cooling, and looking at the use of methane recovery and resurrecting the gas engine. That came to nothing because of the rising groundwater. Next slide, please. And today, if you look at the same site, what was the limestone quarry is now a lake. The spoil heaps and landfill around the southern part of the site are recreational areas. Part have been restored for agriculture, but the left-hand side is now a new nature reserve that takes advantage of basically biodiversity net gain and nature-based solutions to establish a nature reserve that recognizes how interesting species will re-establish themselves on spoil heaps over time if you manage them correctly. And then the main area is now the Explore, the Langer Rourke Explore Industrial Park. It's their main manufacturing facility for off-site manufacturing. Within construction, a lot of sites in major cities, London, Leeds, Manchester, don't have space to manufacture buildings in place, particularly for tall hotels or office buildings or hospitals. Then pre-manufactured, precast in this factory and shipped to site for just-in-time delivery, for taking off a lorry by crane and putting into place. And this is where an awful lot of those facilities are now manufactured. It's a state-of-the-art, computer-operated, precast manufacturing facility. A lot of the community that worked and had become unemployed locally are now there, and a lot of the local workforce are also working for local suppliers. Next slide, please.
Henry, sorry to trouble you, just if you could try and wrap up in a couple of minutes.
That is my last slide now. So to summarise, the UK experience covers deep and open cast coal. We've had many sites closed without adequate planning. The impact can be wider than expected, regional rather than just local. Any closure planning needs to include all connected stakeholders, a strong strategy, and I think, in summary, plan, review and plan again. There are so many opportunities now for carbon reduction and diversification. And I think, I suppose, to pick up on what other speakers have said, for each country and coal mining region, the process needs to be planned. It needs to be planned well in advance, if possible. EU funds will be available for regional studies, and as shown today, these studies need to look at and learn good and bad lessons that we've developed elsewhere. Hopefully this morning we've helped this process by showing some of the positive lessons and ideas we have in the UK and with PV across Europe, and how we've managed these legacy issues. And I think that is a good point for me to say thank you very much and pass back to Tim.
Thank you, Henry. That's really interesting. To see these very practical, real-life examples from the UK, and the case of Snowdon shows that even in a place like Kent, where land is at a premium, it's still not always easy to come up with a successful project. There are a couple of questions for you, if you don't mind. One from Jan Bondarok from the Central Mining Institute. Can you determine what criteria are most important to combine the appropriate mixture of remediation techniques versus mixed use of the plots? So I guess the question is, how do you decide what to do with it, essentially? I don't think there's a single answer to that, sadly. I think it depends on the site itself and its regional context. In Kent, the opportunities, as you say, Kent in the southeast has high land values. It has a lot of food generation, therefore the opportunities are there for food-related regeneration. Up in the Midlands, manufacturing is more appropriate if the infrastructure is there and if the demand is there. It's got to be a balance between the state of the site, what are the opportunities in the local community, what are the demands in the local community, can we do effective heat recovery? So it's almost needs matrix mapping for each site to actually develop what is going to be most useful and what is going to be least useful. We've got at least one site in Kent where actually recreation is probably the most important thing to bring forward for a large chunk of the site. We've got others where, bluntly, employment for the local community is most critical. If you look at the sites in the Midlands, it tends to be employment driven and high value employment. There are other sites I can think of where actually relatively low grade employment is more critical, because that's
what is needed within the community, it tends to be relatively, there is a large demand for a high volume of relatively low grade jobs, because nobody has invested in education in that community in the past. So sorry, no single answer.
No, it's clear that one size doesn't fit all. Really, it depends on the social and economic context, I guess. There are a couple of questions from Radoslav Vukush, which I think might be relevant to you, possibly to Simon as well. One is, does the rehabilitation of coal mines take account of the goals of sustainable development of the United Nations? I guess that's the UN Global Compact, whether that's a factor.
Yeah.
Yes.
It needs to, it should be, it should form part of the planning. So yes, but the problem with our legacy is that over the 35 years since a lot of the pits closed, certainly the ones in Kent, no, they weren't integrated into the closure processes or planning, but they should be. Certainly now, when I'm working on projects, say in Africa, where you're dealing with gold mines that have been in place for over 100 years, and we're planning for something that was never planned for at all, and where you have very large communities built up around a pit head, yes, the SDGs and the Global Compact form an integral part of how we plan that strategy.
It's also,
Simon?
Yeah, it also underpins a lot of the funding that is got from both national governments and regions, and equally importantly from private funders and private investors. It's all very, very important. Those links are very important. So I guess it's goal 3, good health and well-being. Goal 4, quality education. 5, gender equality. 8, decent work and economic growth. 9, industry, innovation, infrastructure, and 11, sustainable cities. I think are all important elements to that.
Yes. So the answer is yes, Radoslav. It's important to the management of these projects. Radoslav had another question. In your experience, is the closure of a mine carried out only according to the mining project, or is it also in the competence of the state? The state bodies, the state institutions? I'm sure the answer is yes, it is. But Henry?
Or should be. The answer is yes, and it certainly should be. And I think the whole involvement of the Coal Authority in addressing our legacy issues shows the importance of state bodies, that strategic planning and the overarching resolution of the issues that come out of closure.
Thank you. And 2 questions for Ferenc. I think you're still on the line, Ferenc. One from Renaud Vallier, who's asking, regarding PV projects on brownfield financing in Hungary, what are the securities requested from the Hungarian local banks? Can you help with that one? Yeah.
Yes. So the question was about securities.
Yes, what securities are requested from Hungarian local banks for the projects, your solar PV projects on brownfield sites?
Well, for example, in the case I mentioned, where you have a 30 years of lease agreement for the land, so even the project developer doesn't own the land, but has a 30 years agreement. And actually, in this case, the 30 years fee was paid upfront in the beginning. So by this way, for the financing institution, the security that the asset location is, let's say, clarified for the next 30 years, this was sufficient from the land perspective, and the feed-in tariff guaranteed by the Hungarian state. So on that sense, there was no additional requirement.
Thank you. I think that answers, I hope that answers the question. And another one for you, Ferenc, from Alexander Dedinets from the Macedonian Academy of Science. In North Macedonia, we have an ongoing tender for 100 megawatt solar PV on an old coal mine with public-private partnership. What do you think about this mechanism? PPP, I guess.
Yes, I haven't studied that North Macedonian tender in details. I'm aware that it is a 2 times 50 megawatt project, but to some extent the examples I have shown, and there are projects in Hungary I have not shown, but when the land is a state-owned land and the takeoff price is guaranteed by the state, to some extent it is also a public-private partnership, because the public offers the land, the public offers the price for the electricity generated, then it can be considered. It depends on how the situation in the North Macedonian case. I assume something similar, that the project should be developed at the land offered by the state.
Thank you. Yeah, I hope that answer is useful, Alexander. We don't seem to have any more questions, and also I think we are out of time now. So perhaps it just remains to me to say 1 or 2 words at the end. I would first of all, of course, like to thank the presenters for giving their time so generously today and sharing their experience, and to our audience for your interest and participation and the many excellent questions that you've been asking as we go along. And finally, I'd like to thank our technical partners, Advantix, for their excellent work behind the scenes on this. I also want to just point out again that the contact details for all of my DIT colleagues around the region are available on the home page of this website, the event website. And we'd all be very happy to help you to follow up on any specific areas of interest that you have. We're also interested to know what topics we could help you to explore in more detail in our future activities in this area. And finally, to remind you that the presentations and a video recording of the event will be on the event website by the 10th of March, if you would like to access them. I think the organisers will send out a reminder about that. So I think it's just to say thank you very much for your interest and attention, and I hope we have a chance to engage on this topic again very soon. And goodbye to everyone, and have a nice weekend. Goodbye.